Hello. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Dr. Nicole Walton-Trujillo. I have been working remotely now for the last, more often than not in the last year, much like a lot of you. The idea of wearing shoes all day is going to kill me. So just like I'm working from home, take off your shoes. You can do that too. Why? Because we're working remotely, right? So I have a background in patient experience. I have a background in imaging. I've been in medicine for about 18 years. I've done everything from a frontline clinician to running trauma teams, running the ER, running radiology for all of my career, and have just recently started doing more work in patient experience. I'm with Intermountain Healthcare of Nevada. I also am an educator and associate director for the Burdick Academy Medical Program, which is a subsidiary of USC, currently building a brand new, beautiful, pretty Las Vegas campus. So I'm bored most of the time. But I did get my doctorate, I finished up my doctorate through the fun of the pandemic, and my dissertation was on interdepartmental communication in respect to workplace trauma for us, for clinicians. She didn't tell me how to do this, so if I break it, we're just gonna explore it. Fix it. I need IT. Yay, see, if he can't work it either and I can't work it either, that means I didn't break it. So we're gonna go this way and go old school. There we go. So we are gonna go through some story time. Yeah, I'm just gonna go old school and click a button. We are gonna talk about what the problem is around interdepartmental communication and trauma to our teams. A bit of the research that was done in the process, what that framework looked around for the research, what the methods were, who I talked to, who I sampled from in terms of that research, the data collection process, as well as, look at you. What do you keep these in your purse? I mean, your bag? Your satchel? And then what did we figure out? So, a little story time. I got into this process because, if you can imagine, I was working. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting in the radiology department. I had one coworker working with me in trauma 2-level hospital. EMS called the ER saying we have a patient on the way in. He 19-year-old male jumped off the 2nd story of his home to try to make it into the swimming pool and missed. He's on route straight through. We have orders. So they put in orders for a CT head, a CT neck, and a whole book of x-rays. So when he came through, he went, do not stop, do not collect $200 through the ER. They literally banded him all the way to CT. 3 o'clock in the morning, now my partner went on break. So I'm down there by myself now. This is not a normal, working in this department for years at this point. It's hospital week. There's the one time in the year when the cafeteria left the soda machines open for the graveyard shift. So you get free Dr. Pepper all night long. I don't know if you realize how important that is. Patient got to me, got him on a CT. Then he was a little non-responsive, kind of had to use the mom voice, kind of keep him stable, keep him on the table, keep him doing what he was supposed to do, get him into the x-ray, and his mom shows up. His mom is very much, oh, my angels, help my son, save my son. I said, Mom, I need you to sit out here in the chair outside of the department, let me go get my imaging done, and we'll get back to you. I am in, those x-ray tubes and tables that don't lower, because they're the floral ones. I bring the table up, get him on the table, shoot a whole book on him. Worried I don't quite have all the shots. I have mom come in and say, Mom, will you just sit with your son just 1 second? Let me go throw these on the processor. Old school CR system, just tagged them, loaded them, they'd run themselves. In the process, I wasn't gone a minute. I hear noise coming from my lab. Walk in. Son is decided that he's going to haul off and cold cock his mom right across face. Without thinking, didn't even think about it at all. I walked right up next to mom, who was sitting here on the table, and I just shoved mom right out of the way. Didn't even think about it, just was protecting patient's mom. Well, that put all that aggression and focus on me because I had the audacity to stop it from hitting his mother. In the next 22 minutes of my life, this man broke my zygomatic arch, broke 3 ribs, broke my collarbone. He broke my back because he shoved me into to the counter and the cabinets behind me. Proceeded to, the door had been opened because mom just ran. Didn't get help, just ran away. I'm screaming and hollering for help. I'm in the department by myself. Finally, one of the guys up on the floor who liked Dr. Pepper as much as I did was coming down on his break to go, hey, Nick, go get some caffeine. Saw what was happening. He called, got me some help. But still in that 22 minutes, by the time security got there, the ER got there, they were putting, drugs into a system that were doing nothing. He ended up with my hand in his mouth. And every time they tried to pull me away from him, he would bite down on my hand for 22 minutes. The cops finally showed up. Tiny little cop, I will never forget his face. I am not a tall or statuesque person, let's just say. This little man was this tall, slid up between me and the patient, grinned at me, said, here, I think you need some help, reached over, grabbed this man's mandible, and about ripped it off his face. For 22 minutes, my life changed completely. We literally dragged his, excuse my language, we dragged his merry ass back onto his gurney, put a spit guard on him, strained him to the gurney, got him to the ER, and then they got me some help. That changed the course of my life because there was nothing that should have warned me or could have warned me that did warn me the state of this patient when I got it. It was just delivered to the department, needs help. In that process, it changed the course of my career because there has got to be a better way. How many of you started off as X-ray techs? Good old fashion shooting studies. Okay, you're late, young lady, and we would like a 2-page essay on why you were late to class.
I'll make up for it.
Did you ever have a patient that was violent, verbally abusive, physically abusive, shouted out racial slurs at you? How'd you deal with it? Or can you tell me about it? This is story time. Tell me about that situation. What you got?
I wasn't actually there. It wasn't my patient. But it did happen.
But it happens.
So there was a level of trauma center. Patient was on a backboard with a C collar on. It's going through a
Everyday stuff. We do it 100 times a day.
Joker got away off the collar, or off the backboard that he was strapped onto, and dove through a limited glass window into the controller.
What? Did they just walk around the wall?
Yeah. So as you found out, he still has to save his life. Probably not.
Even more.
There's a little bit of PTSD.
Well, yeah. What about you?
Just in the cooler, this one different situations go through my head. But I've definitely been, my chemist from scratch, pulled down, and my hair ran pulled in. I don't know, I was always pretty front, like I was good at starting with people when they would try to attack me. I guess that's all I got. I can't say that it was, a really good technique or that I did something spectacular, but I just, I myself have been with PTSD. So when something happens to me, I react. And each time I could see a startled look on their face. So I attributed to that, but I can't really say it's fantastic.
What you got, Nick?
Yeah, so, I think back, nothing recent, but, my mind state then, I was a very shy, introverted person too. And even I had been in healthcare for so long, I had this patient who was like, I don't want you to take care of me. I'm like, why? You damn immigrants come in here, you take all the jobs, and he just went off on me. And I'm like, well, what do I do? I've never had somebody approach me with this. And then I can even, bring myself to the words. I'm like, well, I have a German guy, I have a Polish, it's like,
Would you like to make your country in trouble?
and then he just went off and he was just yelling and screaming. And of course, this is an outpatient facility, so you can't say, okay, let me call security or something. So at the moment, I was like, well, I guess I just have to stand there and take it. Now, of course, I'd be firm in what my response would be. But to your point of how do you prepare yourself, especially my fear has always been for the new techs coming in. This is a rough environment, right? And you never know who's going to be in front of you, your state of mind. And how do you prepare people to react or respond to this?
Exactly. Yeah.
I work in the prison, so it's always good. And
I'm gonna go home now. I am no longer needed.
I mean, like you always say, people have to like stand through, when they walk in, look at how they're standing, with the hands, to be aware where you're standing. You always have to stay well. It's kind of life-changing in terms of that.
I mean, I know I've had patients for years being either aggressive, stupid. I mean, as a woman, I've had my backside grabbed and had to have moments, quick moments saying, all right, that's enough. Your mama raised you that way. But this moment that happened to me, I clearly remember the big thought that was in my head was, I need to protect my patient. Because I remember what I saw on the films as they were processing when I was leaving, and I knew he had fractures. I knew it. So my first thought was, he's altered. I have to protect my patient and keep them on this high level table. I couldn't lower the table, it was a corporate table. So I know in my head I was obsessively spinning around the concept of, I have to protect my patient. He's my patient. And every time I would try to keep him on the table to protect him is when he would assault. And then I became that focus, and he would grab me and just assault me. And I remember it felt like I was alone in that room screaming for help. Behind leaded walls, behind more leaded walls, in a radiology department at 3 in the morning in the corner of the hospital for 3 hours. When they told me it was 22 minutes, they had to show me the security footage of me when I took it down the hall and when they brought it back down the hall. Because I could not wrap my brain around the fact that that was only 22 minutes. But it also made me think back of all the times in my career when I was just blown off. It's just part of what we deal with. It's just, your patients are going to say stuff. It's okay. It's just part of what we deal with. Nobody gets hurt. You'll be fine. And I realized that's probably not the best way. We could probably come up with a better plan. And after looking, I could not find a better plan. So I realized, well, now I will do that too. So that's when I went back to school to get more education. Now, it happens at work. Let's see if I can figure out how to make this work. Give me a second. I found this little video history. Neil watched There's a patient who gets quite aggressive in a hospital in, I believe, in Oklahoma. She's frantically looking for the emergency button under the desk. It's got to be somewhere. And what's hard to see because of the glare is he's literally taking a pole and eating a doctor to death. Unfortunately, this happens. And what did I do with that? I'm going to lose this in 5 more minutes.
We don't need that.
So the facts are, violence in the hospitals for healthcare workers have increased 37% in the last 3 years. And last year from COVID, it's almost doubled to that due to the restrictions that we have in our facilities. You can't go in to visit your loved ones. We are dropping them off at the ER and we are not seeing them again potentially. 1 out of 4 clinicians experience verbal or physical violence in their careers, and 3 out of 4 workplace assaults occur in the healthcare setting. That's so much. And just let that take in. That's a lot. And not a one of us signed up assuming that we would have workplace violence towards our clinicians when we decided to go into medicine. Because we went into medicine to help people. 70% of our care team members have been physically or verbally attacked, and 80% of those in emergency medicine will experience trauma in their careers. And the emergency medicine also includes your techs that run the departments of the ER. These affect their physical health, their emotional health, and their standards of care. So we already figured out what the problem is. We need to address this starting. How are we communicating? How is communication being managed when there's a violent patient or a potentially violent patient being treated within our departments, from the emergency department to anywhere else in the facility? We know that there is very little managed communication when there's a violent patient or potentially violent patient being treated, specifically between the ER and ancillary departments of the hospital. I mean, I'm sure we can name all the departments that work with the ER. Yeah, respiratory, lab, X-ray, CT, the floor. We just keep in the air, but they just stay there, then they go home. Long-term care facilities, prisons, our local sheriff and police departments. I don't know what the rules are where you live, but where I used to live, if someone was found ETOH anywhere in the county, in Lincoln County, they weren't brought to the police department, they were brought to the hospital. Just so before then, they might be arrested or they might be charged and then released home. So the purpose of my study was to, I had to prove it was happening, not just to me, but to other people. Prove that there was a body of knowledge out there, educational knowledge out there, literary knowledge out there that showed that yes, that we have to communicate and communicate effectively in medicine. And that there was nothing out there currently about the topic of trauma clinicians and relating that to communications within our departments. So my research question, how do we increase that communication with respect to workplace trauma, safety, and trauma situations to our teams? And this is the whole goal. The whole goal was to, how do we manage it? How do we prove it's happening? What are we doing that proves it's happening? How is that affecting the patient's experience? How are we applying change management techniques to affect change in our departments? How are we currently communicating? And as a leadership level, how are we managing all of this?
It's got a laser.
Good, because if I kill the battery in this and I don't know how to replace the battery in this, playing with my 1-year-old grandson's gonna be a lot less fun. You know, they will chase it around the floor like a cat. So I used a qualitative approach, and I used the Van Keen method, which had to do with phenomenological interview methods, which meant it was all about the perception and the lived experience of the people that I interviewed throughout my research. And I made a point of using imaging clinicians specifically as my patient of my research population, and from people who had been in the field from 6 months to 25 years. Men, women from all over the country. The goal was to check out their attitudes, have them describe their experiences, and that way they could be a good population sample for the work that we do. And I have a note here to hold on. According to the ASRT, there are currently, as of 2020, 338,718 licensed diagnostic imaging professionals in the United States. I guess I thought there would be more than that number.
It's a clinical side.
Yeah. My goal was to find out whether I could understand at least a sample population of their lived experience. I used purposive sampling for that group based on that select criteria. Current work within a clinical care environment within the last 5 years. First responders in imaging that are or have worked in the last 5 years, as well as the imaging clinicians that are working currently or have worked in the last 5 years. With the goal of finding people that, at least 3 that had worked in the field for 20 years or more. So that there was a good history, a good tribal knowledge. This allowed the ability for you to be able to question them over specific knowledge of their experience. We know that Herschel stated that independent experiences could be relatable to each other. Thus, the dawn of the science of phenomena or shared experience could be used as a research method. Each area of the survey that I used was listed as dependable, credible, and transferable and conformative. It ensured that the quality of the findings were consistent across the board. Plus, keeping all of my research done within imaging allowed for shared language. We speak a unique language that the rest of medicine does not speak. When I see PCXR, I know what that stands for. Portable chest X-ray, exactly. It's all about being able to speak the same language when we're working together, and thus also speaking the same language when I'm interviewing them so that I can have comparable results. There were 6 open-ended questions used in the survey. Now, why would I ask for open-ended questions? Yes.
Yeah.
That was exactly right. Because if I asked you, sir, how's your day gone today?
Fine.
I didn't even get a one-word answer. Or if I ask you, tell me about your morning.
You're gonna get stuff that's important that's on your mind right then, that's for sure.
Right, but I'm gonna get more than that one-word answer. And that's actually a tidbit we could take into our careers now. With wearing masks, communication has completely changed subconsciously in the way we speak. Because if I subconsciously just ask you a question with expecting a one-word answer or one where you could give me a one-word answer, it's going to be easier for me to understand you with that mask on. So if I'm thoughtful and lean into those open-ended questions, regardless of my topic, that will increase those foundations of trust and allow for actual communication. It's something I know that I've had to do a little bit of guiding on providers on, because they're wearing masks, the patients wearing masks, people are just naturally reverting to a very one-word answer, yes, no, closed questions process in their clinical practice. So that might be a little tidbit you can take back to your teams. How are they talking to their patients? Are they asking open-ended questions when it comes to their histories?
That's especially important, like even with MRI, you know?
Yeah, very much so.
You ask them 10 times, do you have a pacemaker? And then when you do ask, so anything else that you need to tell me? Oh, by the way, I have this little thing in my chest. You know, it brings out so many different stories.
According to my list, it looks like you had surgery in 2020 for your gallbladder. Were there any other surgeries? No. So tell me about your medical history. Tell me about how, if you have any major issues in your life, talk to me about them. Oh, well, I had my tonsils out when I was 6, and then I had a knee replacement because I was in football, and I fell down and hurt my knee. So they had to go in and replace my knee, and oh yeah, and I had some surgery in my belly, and they did something, but it made it stop hurting. I'm going to get a lot more data with those open questions. All right. So open-ended, semi-structured interview questions done in a private, quiet location. Identical survey questions for each encounter. I recorded and took notes during each encounter and maintained anonymity by labeling each participant with a P1 or P2 or P3 across the board. Now this was kind of fun to do during COVID when I couldn't exactly meet with people face to face. We've all been in those WebEx meetings where they're really not that engaged. They're sliding on their phone under the screen, thinking no one can notice their eyes are looking down the whole time, right? So getting an interview during a WebEx in a quiet place without the screaming family behind them, that was a bit of a challenge to get that opening up and conversation for this project. So my interviews were ended up lasting about 45 minutes to an hour. I used Skype, I used FaceTime, I used Google Duo. One of them was in a park far away. But since we were alone in the park because nobody else was out, we could actually have a conversation and dig into some of the situations. Again, I took a lot of handwritten notes, and the only person who knew who was who on my research was one file in my computer that once it was all listed was locked. And you had to have a password to unlock that one file. And it was stored separately from all of my other digital files. Now this is a tough thing to see probably from there, but this is a copy of the collection instrument. And the questions that I asked were, tell me about a patient in your department that was violent. In my own clinical experience, everyone has had that patient. I'll go ahead and ask you the next one. How much communication did you have about potentially violent patient before you started your clinical care? None. I'm going to go ahead and ask you who works with prisoners, because that's just so much fun. How does it make you feel about how you clinically care for your next workplace trauma patient, that next patient that's, you know, could be potentially hazardous? Are your walls up a little more? Yeah. What kind of interdepartmental communication is available on the orders between your departments? When you get an order from the ER,
I actually work in engineering, so I don't hear.
then you're not answering my question, are you? Beth, will you help a girl? Thank you. So Beth, what kind of information is available on the orders between your departments? When you get an order, what's on there?
Let's see, on all of the heads and tips, it probably says nickname.
LOC.
Right?
Deficient in ADLs. But what else, what kind of information is, I mean, this is a really basic question. What's on an order?
What the exam is, patient name, date of birth, medical record number, ordering physician, maybe, fellow. Patient fellow.
What do you mean by nicknames?
Ours have what the patient's first name.
Oh, the nickname of your patient, okay. I was like, nicknames, I need more data than
Right.
just nicknames. Like Sunshine ordered it, I mean, were we?
Right. Male, female, other.
No, female, other. What about the department they're in? Okay,
The location.
yep, location. And, Nicole, have you ever had to go to a code in another department from a patient that was violent in your ER? Anything you can remember about the situation? And how much information did you have on the patient before you responded?
Zero.
Zero information. What did you know to go? We're just sitting there drinking a Starbucks, job it,
Page of where it's at. But once you get in there, or the same, likewise, if people come to my department too, you don't know if this patient is COVID, their disease, how they're reacting, and you just walk into potentially a mess.
Yeah, to chaos.
Yeah.
You are part of the chaos team.
Right.
All right. If you could make any change to how interdepartmental communication between departments currently exists, what would you change? That's a fun question to ask a tech.
That'd be great if they could put it on the order, maybe a cold word or something that this is a potentially violent patient. For us, we're so small that it required that an ENT goes into X-ray or CT or the police when they bring these patients in. So that's a requirement that I have just to protect my techs, because like you said, you were in a leaded room, all of this other corner, I don't want to see that happen.
Leaded room, surrounded in a leaded department. My room had lead in the hallways all the way around too. There was no, I just screamed forever. I screamed till I was hoarse in 22 minutes.
And I just can't imagine that happening, wanting that to happen. So
Absolutely.
there's protocols that I have in place, but again, I don't know that until we go to the ER and see this crazy person on call.
Well, what if they're not a crazy person on call?
We don't know until we get back in the
What
department.
if they're just AMS? Or they've just been sleeping on their cot the whole time? So what communication would you put on an order if you could, or between departments if you could? Anything. The world is your oyster.
I want to know about workflow processes and how each department interacts with each other, and how we study processes, how we streamline processes, and find ways to make things better, both for the employees and the patients.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So, a long time ago, I think you probably do this back and you might not be able to now, but like, so when I was at Mad, we had a patient hospital in there, and some of the prisoners, probably aware, like to throw food and some other things. So
Oh, yeah.
they would, we would just put, I think you can't do a lot of this stuff now, but we would put signs like outside their door, like there's a monkey throwing food, stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah, you can't really get away with that anymore.
yeah, so you can't, but I think there's probably ways within the ordering system technology of, while they've got reasons for exam, there probably to be another, precautions included.
Yeah, precautions included.
That may or may not be known at the time.
So after collecting all the data from all over the country, because although I did have the ability to do my research, and it was approved through all the right people to allow me to do my research with virtual meetings, that did also open up the ability to talk to people from all over the country. Where I would have been getting on planes and flying to Texas, flying to California, flying to Florida, flying to DC to get one-on-one with people. So I have to admit that although COVID made it complicated in a lot of ways, it did save me a whole lot of money in airfare and Starbucks. I would have had to buy a lot of Starbucks. Not like I, it's not like I don't offer these. But all of the data was organized by participant in that alphanumeric code. The data was compiled with alphanumeric coding. The recordings were transcribed through a software service called In Vivo, so that it was a third-party transcription service. And then all of the relationships were reviewed that came up in the research. Again, that Bandcam's method was used to analyze using horizontalization techniques to look for reduction and elimination ability in the data points that were coming back. And then also thematizing the results. As you can see, of my 10 participants, I had people who work both outpatient, hospital-based, or both. I had a history of workplace trauma, which was a resounding yes everywhere, which I was not surprised by, as well as a history of trauma during the scope of their practice and whether they were male or female. And in my findings, the themes that came through were the proof that it happened. We could see that experience that all of these participants on the far right column either experienced violence in the clinical healthcare environment, had a lived experience that was just expected, part of the potential work process. It was just the norm, it was just part of the job. Had prior experience with a violent patient on a new order, and had a lived experience that created apprehension towards patients moving forward. When you beat your people, they can end up with PTSD. They can end up with that, their hair's up, that hackle being raised when they're walking into a patient's room for the next clinical encounter. And do you think that's going to affect their ability to provide appropriate patient experience to the next patient? It's going to affect it. Because all of a sudden, they're not going to give all of them. Because a part of them is looking for the IV pole that gets swung at their head. The sub-theme of communication, that the communication about violent patient from ordering departments did not exist, that they would make change to interdepartmental communications if possible. They were able to describe information on current ordering process, i.e., everything I'll mention, date of birth, MR number, ICD codes, CPT codes, dates, time of order, and ordering physician's name. It was fascinating to hear the quotes that I was able to use from these 10 patients, such as, the first time I turned my back on the patient, he tried to attack me with the IV pole that was within his reach. This was a recurrent theme across multiple patients. Another patient stated that they went into the patient's room, or the patient was delivered to the imaging technologist in an aggressive state, that it occurred early in careers, within the first year of their clinical practice. In each of the 10 participants' lived experience, 8 out of 10 clinicians experienced trepidation as they entered similar patient situations. And according to participant 5, when I went into a patient's room with a brand new imaging student, and the patient was throwing punches and using racial slurs towards both myself and my student. As we got through the study and left the room, the student with me was visibly shaken. Was able to use the experience to talk the new student tech through the experience and make sure they understand that these things happen and that we just have to let it go. This was this participant that was proud of the fact that he was able to use it as a learning tool for students. That these things just happen and we've got to just let it go. That traumatic experience gave them moments of trepidation as they continued the continuity of care for further patients, and gave the student a feeling of thoughtfulness that still affects the clinicians today in their clinical practice. They are thoughtful of every encounter because they don't know when it's going to happen next. So we were able to prove it happened. We were able to prove that it doesn't happen once, it happens a lot. And at least one, if not multiple encounters within their career with violent patients, and that it affected the future care across the clinical practice. We were able to see that communication about violent patients ordering departments was consistent. That really wasn't communication. And that it's a work process, and how the national standards of care around communication need to be looked at and directly related to the work that we're doing. Management of communication in today's healthcare environment is reviewable within the theme of the findings, but there were limitations. The limitations, of course, being that COVID-19, that national state of emergency, stay-at-home orders and quarantines, the interviews being done through video, and there was a concern for video lag time in getting good facial expressions as we were being told stories. One of the things that we were able to do as a part of the conclusion of the main study, beyond proving that it existed, was working within and reviewing the HIP policies on what we can and can't do. Like you stated a minute ago, we can't exactly put a sign on the door that has a monkey throwing poop. We also can't put a sign on the door that says that they are violent. Yet we are allowed to put signs on the doors that have stars that are followed. So where is that balance? So that balance can come in the form of a HIPAA compliant adjustment to our ordering system. And the implications for the study allow for that. I can find the page I'm looking for. As a recommended practice, working with your IT department on your ordering system, and working with Epic has the ability to adjust. I don't know how many people use Epic in there. What other hospital IDMR are we using? Meditech? Cerna. Sitting down with the people who run that and ask for an identification code or a code to be added in the way that they order the study. Something as simple as an A or a B. An A to indicate that singular staff is sufficient, and a B to indicate that multiple staff is recommended. They could do it with any ordering system that you have now if they can't make an adjustment. They can put in that the CPT code or the ICD-10 code, 2 spaces, and an A or a B. They can put in the reason for the study, 2 spaces, and an A or a B. There's the ability to put it in the system, something as simple as an indication code that says, you know what, have an extra pair of hands. When we have multiple techs in our departments, don't they go together to do portables now and then? Or they work together to be more efficient in a study? Or you know what, I need someone to help hold while I shoot. Or you know what, I got a bone series to run, so I'll shoot, you run them. I'll position, you shoot. We work together as a team. That's the goal. How are we going to remove those invisible walls that we have around our departments to increase that communication? And with the ER, even with the floor patients, patient in the ICU or a patient on the floor who's all of a sudden their mental status has changed and become aggressive. I can speak from personal history. My husband's been in the hospital for the last 6 months, and his mental status has gone every end of the spectrum from a toxoplasmosis, where he was either cognizant and awake and calm, but having hallucinations. Apparently, dogs and lab coats work at City of Hope. Who knew? And the other doctors are robots again, who knew? To being coherent enough to be able to tell you his name and his date of birth, but not who he is, where he is, or who anyone around him is, but call. If you went in to do a portable chest x-ray in his room when he was in that state, wouldn't have ever been an issue. You would never have known it wasn't his normal self. But then there were moments where he was completely non-responsive, aggressive, and had to be restrained because he didn't understand what was going on around him. So our patient statuses can change drastically. Can't put a little note in that says, bring a second set of hands. But you cannot, per HIPAA guidelines and privacy policy, you cannot say one. You cannot say B, alter mental status, patient is aggressive. You can only put in a code that is set up within the system, within multiple departments, and it costs you nothing. But it can save you workman's comp. It can save you staffing challenges. It can save you PTSD on your patients or on your teams. It's a little letter that can save a lot on your department pressure and workplace culture concerns. How many margaritas you got to buy for the team?
So Nicole, have you seen organizations use this?
Yes.
And so what type of codes are they doing like that?
They are doing it just like that with an AD code. And they're putting it in the reason for the study area. Loss of consciousness, ... A. Usually theirs has three, City of Hope is doing it with 3 spaces in between. Because you have a field that you can fill out to give their teams a clue. When my husband was first admitted 6 months ago, husband had a bone marrow transplant, had to go back into the toxicology. When he was back in and he was so up and down in his aggression standards of care and his mental status, I brought up to his nursing staff and the head of clinical trial my dissertation to help save their people, because I couldn't be there. I couldn't go in because of COVID. I couldn't see my husband. All I could do was hear about what was happening. As much as I could try to calm him down over a FaceTime call when he knew who I was or when he didn't know who I was, being able to work with their charge nurse, I brought this topic up, and it's something that they piloted, and it made a difference. I know it's being done in Vegas and a couple of our hospitals. That I was formerly with Desert Radiology. Those hospitals where our rads read in their hospitals, I was able to apply this to. And it's just so simple. It costs you zero, absolutely zero. The hardest thing is to create that buy-in for change. Getting that nurse in the ER on Wednesday night at 10 o'clock at night, or at 6:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before shift change, who has to order that one study to just automatically put in that A or that B. That is the hardest part of this process, is creating that buy-in for change. But it helps. It doesn't cost you anything. There's no cost. It's just going to save you a lot. Because when your tech is insulted for 22 minutes, and all of a sudden they're not allowed to work for the next 3 months because they have to have surgery, and it's workman's comp, so you can't replace the physician because they didn't lose their job, it's being held for them. You now have a stressor on your team, on the remaining techs, that could have been avoided. All I needed was one person with me, one, and this would never have happened. Well, what happened to me would never have happened. And you wouldn't have to listen to this lecture, because that wouldn't have happened, which would have caused this.
How are you suggesting getting by and look at the number of workers' comps related to these?
Look at the number of workers' comp related, do a survey of your people and of the fraternity people, and I will happily send you my dissertation, if that would help you bringing it to your, or the slide deck to your C-suite. I say, we need to work on the interdepartmental communication of our facilities. Being able to talk about what we're doing now, it's easy to just go, yeah, it just happens. And starting that conversation with the C-suite in your next director's meeting or manager's meeting of all the departments, and ask the question, hey, when you were in the field, did you ever have a situation where you had an employee yelling at you or a patient yelling at you, so violent at you? I remember turning around and seeing my patient grab that CR plate and go to whack me in the back of the head with it, and me just blocking it. I just remember that and having to give that mom voice. How many times have you have to give the mom voice for the dad voice without realizing it? Because it's just part of it. It's just for the patient. The next one will be like that, you know. So that is the data that I have. If anyone has any questions, if not, there's some great sample questions you could ask. You know, what's it going to be like to read a book for fun instead of, you know, for school? What do I do with all my free time? I got a full-time second job. How many people will I make read my dissertation who have no idea what went into it? I gave up so many TV shows. So many. And like I said, if you get bored, there's always how many topics do you think about writing when you're writing a dissertation? You just go up for 2 or 3. And then you want to beat yourself going wanting to go through that path again. Anybody have any questions? I don't even know where I am on time, but I think I passed 10 minutes.
So are you going to provide an email link?
I will absolutely, I guess, it's not on there. I'm a horrible human. And it's not on there. So if you want it right now, I'll give you my email, I'll send it to you. If you want it, it's nwaltruj@yahoo.com. It's Nancy Whiskey Alpha Lima Tango Tango Romeo Umbrella Jacob @yahoo.com.